Yep. Hello, welcome to the Colts Cover 2 podcast. I'm Nat Newell, the Colts editor for IndyStar, here with Joel A. Erickson, our Colts insider. We're trying something a little new here with the live aspect of it. We got people who can get on here and ask questions. We are going to do sort of a regular podcast, and we will address the people commenting when we get the chance here. You can see this on our new Colts IndyStar TV Colts channel on YouTube. Joel, why don't we tell the people about our YouTube channel?
Please like and subscribe. And the reason that is has that joking tone is because it's really hard for me to say that. Like this is like people make fun of that in like movies and stuff, and now I'm saying it.
And yes, like and subscribe. It's another way for us to support the coverage, the podcast, all that stuff. So we've off to a pretty good start there without pushing it too hard. So we're Nate Atkins, who used to be our other Colts writer, is no longer with the paper. I am working to find a replacement for Nate, who would then replace me on the pod. So you can root for that if depending on how I do here, but. Obviously, big news day week for the Colts. They've cut down the roster. Tuesday, they added a waiver claim today. Today is the annual Chris Ballard, I guess we call it the Angry Pod press conference before the season. Really interesting exchange today. You were there. I've only seen it in various bits and pieces, but most of the first questions were about the quarterback situation. Of course, Chris Ballard kind of got angry that people weren't asking about anything but the quarterback. What was it like being there live, and what was the situation?
Well, one of the things that sticks out to me is just like I said to the other writers before Ballard came in, this is going to be the most prickly he's going to be all year. He's always every year I've been here. When you get to the end of the roster, when he's kind of got his hackles up, like I said, just about every year, and so I was expecting it, and then I think it kind of went the way I expected. But the other thing is just. It's a kind of a dual. It's kind of like a double-edged sword where he's just going to get mad no matter what when he's talking about the quarterbacks, because he felt like we haven't talked enough about Daniel Jones, but he also feels like he has to defend himself on Anthony Richardson, and he has to defend Anthony Richardson. So he's just defensive around the whole thing. And when Ballard gets defensive, he tends to get prickly. I do think that just anecdotally. This is not his best look publicly. I've said on this podcast before that sometimes I try to keep track of like what I hear from people in the real world, not the online world. And typically, I think whenever he has these press conferences, I get more questions about his demeanor than I do at any other point of the year.
And it's like on one hand, I understand why he doesn't want to just talk about the quarterback. And to his credit, I mean, we can have a long discussion about this, but the rest of the team has a chance to be good. Like everything, but the quarterback is the most important position in sports. So if the quarterback's not there, you're going to get questions about it. Now, he did acknowledge that. I mean, he said, yeah, you're right to be you're right to have doubts, and I understand why people are asking it. But to me, it was really interesting. Chris Ballard's pretty good about understanding how the media game's played, but he clearly wanted to get mad, but realized he couldn't. But he still let plenty of the sort of how he actually felt slip through there. So,
well, he also took a few more jabs with us than I'm used to. The thing about this that happens to me every year. This is like some of the inside baseball stuff, but like for some reason he always wants to do it like when the waiver wire is coming out. So like
a lot of fun for us.
Yeah, it's great for me because they had 3 guys claim today. They claimed one themselves. The practice squad is starting, and the hard part for me is that we have to get all that stuff up on the website. And you're trying to do that. I'm trying to find out who's on the practice squad. It's hard to get a question in anyway. Yeah, it's not my favorite in terms of timing. I think with Ballard, it's I think this has progressively kind of happened with him over the course of his time. It feels like to me that it's kind of progressively he's progressively gotten a little bit more combative, but that's also the questions have gotten harder.
Well,
You know,
it's 9 years and you haven't won the division. You've made you got one playoff win. I mean, he just hasn't gotten the job done. And now the one thing you and I have talked about from time to time is, was there an opportunity that he missed that he should have taken? I mean, we've talked about, could you have talked Philip Rivers into coming back a second year? I think you could have. So that would have been perhaps. I mean, he would have been 41, so maybe not, but perhaps another playoff season. Instead, you went the Carson Wentz route, which I understood at the time did not work at all. Matt Ryan, I understood that didn't work at all, and now you're where you're at with Richardson. And again, as we, again, I don't say this much publicly, but I was never in Richardson's camp. Again, if Anthony Richardson worked out, that'd be great. Obviously, nothing personal. It's good for him. It's good for us. It's good for me. People want to read about a successful team, but as I've always said, like, if you look at first round quarterbacks, 2/3, you take out the number one picks, 2/3 of them fail. So you ask me, is the quarterback going to be a success when you pick him? I'm going to say no, because I'm going to be right a lot more than I'm wrong. Now, the other side of that is I'm not sure Daniel Jones is any good either. So I guess where are you at on all of this after hearing Ballard talk today?
well, Ballard. So I'm going to start with Daniel Jones because I think that's the easiest one. I think that's the simplest one, maybe, to talk about. Is just that, Daniel Jones he mentioned Alex Smith, and he specifically mentioned Alex Smith with the Chiefs. If you go back and look at Alex Smith with the Chiefs, he was not the driving force in that offense. That was an Andy Reid offense that Alex Smith just kind of played point guard for. He wasn't like, he was good, but they were obviously looking for something better because they went out and drafted Patrick Mahomes while they had him. He was kind of a game manager. He wasn't going to make mistakes. That's what they're hoping to get out of Daniel Jones. And I think it kind of frames this quarterback discussion in a little bit different way than the way a lot of people are talking about it. I feel like a lot of people are talking about it in a way that's more like, how could they pick Daniel Jones? Why are they expecting him to be so great? I don't think it's that. I think it's more that they're hoping that he can be a little more consistent. There's obviously reasons from when he was with the Giants to believe that that's not necessarily possible. But Ballard bringing up Alex Smith, if you go back and look at his Niners time, he was a lot more kind of up and down before he was done with the Niners until Jim Harbaugh got there. And then once he got with Andy Reid, it was a lot better. So that's the bet. That's the play they're making. I don't think they're expecting to get, I hesitate to say Pro Bowler because Pro Bowl has been skewed so much over the course of time, that it doesn't mean anything. But this, like, that top level of player at the position, I don't think they're expecting to get that. I think they're hoping to get somebody who can kind of manage the offense and will do the things that Shane Steichen finds in do the thing that Shane Steichen can find in offenses, which is that's what made him a candidate in the first place, was that he's good at finding holes in defenses.
And I will say, Nate cited me saying that there's never been a quarterback who was benched twice and had any success. Alex Smith was benched twice and had some success. I'll want to make sure I correct that. Rex Grossman is the other quarterback, first-round quarterback that we had found, I think, since 2000, that had been benched and came back and had success. I'm kind of okay with that mistake, in that if I can find two in 25 years, it means it's really, really hard to do. So I'm okay with that, but I do want to make sure I set the record straight on that. I mean, the other thing, if we want to get positive here, is they were one pass away from winning the division with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. So, again, do I want to am I betting on Daniel Jones to get him to the playoffs? No. But I don't think this is a totally lost cause, and they got weapons. I mean, the receivers are good. They had 3 800-yard receivers with as messy as the quarterback situation was last year. Tyler Warren looks legit. Jonathan Taylor is obviously good. I'm a little concerned about the offensive line. We'll see what happens there. But I mean, I guess again, I'm not asking you to pick that, but where are you coming down on if it's possible that this works with works being make the playoffs?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just I don't know what the other options are if and this is maybe where we kind of get into Richardson a little bit, but just if you don't feel like Richardson, this is the second time that someone has said indirectly or directly, that Jones is going to make the right protection calls, he's going to make the right checks. Essentially, he's going to run the offense, and so like that's the if he can't do that, like I don't necessarily know how you run an offense. Like he's getting better at it, that's what they say, but like that's the hard part is that fans, we don't see that. It's hard for us to see whether or not the right check was made, whether or not the right protection call was made, but you see the effects of it in that Baltimore Ravens game. And if that's going on more than that, I think that was, we've talked when Nate was still here, we talked about that on the podcast. I thought that was the thing that we couldn't see that would flip it. And it seemed like it did, is that, there was stuff going on that Richardson is missing in the offense, and you just can't really play NFL offense that way. You just can't. Like the NFL is not college football where you just kind of line up and simplify everything and just hope it's going to work. Like it's a matchup game. And so they're I think I said this a couple of weeks ago, but I think, or whenever, maybe it was just a week ago, whenever they made the decision, I don't think this is necessarily a decision so much about how great Daniel Jones is. I think it's that Anthony Richardson didn't get to where they wanted him to go.
And that gets back to Ballard sort of not liking the fact that all the questions were about Anthony Richardson, but this is all about Anthony Richardson. Ballard, one of the other things he said that was newsworthy is that they're not going to trade Richardson. Obviously, what else is he going to say at this press conference? But if they cut him after this year, it's $10 million in dead cap, as far as I understand it. If they trade him, it's $5 million. I mean, I could also see some kind of scenario where, hey, let's see how it goes this year, and then, and we'll take care of you one way or another after that. So I just can't see Richardson being on the team past this year unless he comes in and plays and is really good. So I don't know any other Richardson comments off of, or quarterback comments off of the press conference today.
Well, Richardson, that he's holding out hope, and they've kind of reminded us. He said again today, I think the quote was something along the lines of, I don't know why anyone would expect a 21 or 22-year-old to be fully mature and fully figured out. Like, in a vacuum, I understand that. In a vacuum, I understand what he's saying. They said when they picked him that he was young. But the reality is that the NFL puts more pressure on those guys than the age, unless you sit them right away. So when the Colts, and they've said that this was a mistake. I think Ballard might have said it again today. But they've said that it was a mistake to do this. You got yourself behind the 8 ball with him by throwing him in there right away. And if you didn't put him in right away, if you had just sat him for the first couple of years, if this was a Jordan Love situation and everyone was kind of wondering year after year, can this guy play while you were getting him ready? Now, it wouldn't have been the same because they don't have Aaron Rodgers here to do stuff. That's where we get back to the Philip Rivers thing and whether or not they could have done something that way. But if you got back to if you'd sat him, I don't think you have those questions. The thing is, he played, and that threw everything out of whack, because as soon as they play in the NFL, the expectations start going, everything starts going, and they put him in a bad position, and now they're trying to essentially go back and redo it. And Ballard tried to play the Alex Smith hand maybe that works out, maybe it doesn't. But he also kind of said, yeah, they keep saying no one's done it before. Well, someone's got to do it at some point. That's not the strategy I want from a football
hope is not a strategy.
Like hoping for something that's never happened before is a really tough sell to everybody.
Hey, we got one question here before we move off a quarterback. We got a couple questions, but Rambo 25, do you think the Colts will definitely draft a quarterback in this supposed great 2026 draft for quarterbacks in the first round, no matter how this season materializes? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so there's a couple of different things here. If this season goes the way most people think it does and they struggle and there's change, everything's out the window. You know, if it's a new regime in here, we have to relearn the GM. We have to relearn everything. Some GMs will come in, tear down everything and say, we need to have the infrastructure around it before we draft the quarterbacks. Some of it may depend on the pick. That I think is what everybody thinks is the most likely scenario for this season going forward. There's a scenario like if we'll go with what the Colts think is the best case scenario. If Daniel Jones plays like a Kansas City version of Alex Smith, where you're around like 20 touchdown passes, 5 to 7 interceptions, you're very accurate and you just kind of don't mess it up, and they make the playoffs. The Alex Smith example says you don't necessarily definitely have to draft a quarterback because you wait till the right one comes along and you just kind of keep making the playoffs until you get that right quarterback. If you remember those Chiefs teams, that was back when the AL West wasn't very good and they would run off a bunch of wins. They couldn't win in the playoffs because they didn't really have the next level quarterback. That's why they went to Mahomes. It's funny that we're talking about this because you have to go back to the first edition of the Cover 2 when it was me, Jim Aiello, and we talked about the Alex Smith example of finding somebody who could kind of hold down the fort while you looked for your quarterback back then. But man, that ship feels like it's sailed now because of the pressure on the team. Now, if you win 12 games or something, then maybe you get the cachet to do that. I don't think anybody's really expecting them to win that much with it. That's the best case scenario. And in that case, then you feel like maybe we don't necessarily need to do the same. Maybe we don't necessarily have to draft a quarterback. I also say this is also a really quick one. This question is good, Rambo, because it has lots of tendrils. The other thing about it is forcing themselves into a quarterback, I kind of think is partly how we got here. They had the 4th pick. They didn't trade up. If you go back and look at that draft, Anthony Richardson is really the only pick. Now, they said that they made their decision and then he was the quarterback for them, but he was also really the only quarterback for them at the 4th pick. And so I think when you get into a situation where you're just making a pick to make a pick, there's a chance for something like this where it feels like to all of us that Anthony Richardson is mismatched with the organization.
Yeah, I will bring up the headline for the story I wanted you to write, which is the Colts made a mistake drafting Anthony Richardson, and then it got worse. Hey, they could have taken Will Levis, so it could be worse. Yeah, I mean, the not wanting to trade up in that draft. Now, hindsight's 2020. Bryce Young has not worked out either. You're really talking about C.J. Stroud. So again, there's a whole bunch of what ifs here.
It's a bad quarterback draft. It was a terrible quarterback draft.
And I think, and again, that just goes back to what I said earlier, which is I'm not sure. It's not like we've talked about this. Jordan Love was really the only option that out. I mean, Tom Brady wasn't an option. That's really the only choice they could have made at any point here that might have worked out. Other than, based on, in addition to what they did. I mean, it sort of shows just how difficult the situation is. I mean, they could have traded up for Justin Fields. I don't think that's going to work. So now, again, I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for Chris Ballard. That's the job. He's very well paid for it. He's not asking you to feel sorry for him either. He said that repeatedly, but it is a tricky thing. My answer to that question would be, if they make the playoffs, they're probably not taking a quarterback just because there's probably not going to be one good enough to be there. If they don't make the playoffs, they're likely taking a quarterback. Obviously, as even Rambo noted that it's a lot of stuff going on here before we actually know. But I do, and you make a good point. Is it a whole different regime in here, and that changes everything. But
One
I am not predicting that they make the playoffs, to be clear. But I just think that's the only thing that would keep them from picking a quarterback, more likely than not, in my opinion.
one piece about like going back and looking. Rivers played the 2020 season, so he retired in 2021. The 2021 draft would have been the one where you have Rivers and you maybe take somebody. That quarterback draft also not good.
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Justin Fields is in there. Mac Jones that was not a great draft. Kyle Trask went in the second round. That's another draft where you go, man, you really got to hope that you develop somebody in a different way. I was thinking about this the other day, and this is maybe an interesting thing. I think maybe the other interesting thing is just like, is this, is we've talked about this on the podcast too, but is Shane Steichen really a developer of quarterbacks, or is he just better at maximizing the offense with what he has?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah, I mean, because like we saw, it worked with Minshew. It has not worked with Richardson.
Yeah. So I think we got a couple more questions.
Yeah. One is this is from MD. The organization is rudderless and still lacks direction, even more so after the Daniel Jones decision. If this is truly Anthony Richardson's last sit year, I get it. But what leg does Ballard have to stand on to be defensive? It's deplorable. I think we kind of addressed that. I mean, I certainly agree. Deplorable might be a little strong given the situation, but you're right, 100%. He shouldn't be defensive, and I think he even recognized that based on how he responded. After getting angry, he then said, "I get it, and you're right to doubt me," kind of thing.
Yeah, he kind of faded in and out. The problem is, when you react emotionally, that's all anybody's going to remember. It doesn't like they don't remember the apology. So, and it kind of, and if you keep swinging back and forth between it, it kind of comes off like it's not really an apology too. So yeah, it's one of those things. Like, I also think that I think you've seen this throughout his tenure here. Even if you go back to the Josh McDaniels decision, there's a fighter in him, like for good or for bad. There's a fighter in him where, he says the rivalry's back on after the McDaniels decision. There's a little bit of that in him, and so I think that that's probably what you're seeing. When you haven't made the playoffs in 4 years and people are waiting for you to win, you're right. It's you don't necessarily have a leg to stand on, but it's also kind of like one of those things like, yeah, you kind of also expect him to react the way he did.
We got another question I'll let you handle from Dalton James. Do you think Morocco Brown being let go is related to Richardson's poor development? Brown obviously being one of the assistant general managers that was let go before the start of the season.
That's interesting. I don't have any inside reporting on that I can say definitively that that's what happened. I don't think that's a hard connection to draw. Brown was definitively the lead voice. He was the first one to see Richardson. He texted Chris Ballard from a Florida practice and said, this is the guy. I don't know and they haven't said anything about like, this is the hard part. Cause we asked the questions today, or reporters asked the questions today about if there was something that they missed in Richardson's profile. He's not going to tell us that when Richardson's still on the team. Right. But I think it's fair to wonder if maybe they felt like something about how ready he was or the makeup or something like that wasn't a good evaluation.
And that nicely leads us into MD's second question, which is, I don't think Richardson or the pick was a bust. The process has been. I guess my response would be, I think both, but I think Richardson. I think there's plenty of blame to go around between Richardson and the Colts. I definitely think. I mean, we don't know what happened, but the way this has played out, at the very least, the Colts have made it seem like how they handled it is wrong because they said was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that. I just think both were. I think Richardson was going to be a bust. I understand why they made the pick. I hope I'm wrong still. But I also think the process was poor.
I keep thinking about. I think it was a mismatch of priorities and evaluation. Like Chris Ballard said for years, going back to 2020, going back to after Andrew Luck retired, he said for years that the most important thing to him was accuracy. Like he even had a quote where he said, "We all talk about arm strength. Like, is he accurate?" And then when you got to draft night with Richardson, he was saying stuff like, you know, well, I think you've seen it over the last couple of years that you can teach that. When really the only person you can say I learned that is Josh Allen.
Yeah.
And then Steichen said that this is like what the thing he wanted most was an obsessive quarterback, somebody who was really, really obsessive about their craft until the owners' meetings when he said he thought you could grow that in a player. And so I don't know if they talked themselves into the prospect based on the pick they had. I don't know. But like, I think that to me, that explains some of this, some of the herky jerkiness of the process where it's like, you have to play him right away. You don't have to play him right away. We're pulling him in, we're pulling him out. I don't think they necessarily drafted the quarterback that they were expecting or that they thought that they were going to get. And so that's how you end up with some of these issues.
Yeah, and it's I just an interesting question would be if, and there's a lot of ifs here, obviously, if you had done the trade that Charlotte did with Carolina Panthers. I'm sorry, the for the number one pick with the Bears, which was a number one receiver, which in the Colts case would have been Pittman, and your next year's first round pick, which would have been Latu. Now, obviously, the Panthers were terrible and gave up the first pick overall. It's entirely possible the Browns would have rather traded with the Panthers than the Colts. There was other picks in there, but would you be better off right now if you're the Colts if you had C.J. Stroud, if you had done that trade and had C.J. Stroud? And this is something that Joel has always said: if you get the right quarterback, you don't care what you gave up because you got the right quarterback. And even though Stroud had some issues last year, I still think I'm like 100% happier with this Colts team if they've got C.J. Stroud at quarterback than Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of unanswerable question because we talked at the time about how Steichen wanted to have a quarterback with mobility that Stroud doesn't necessarily have. I mean, he also coached Phillip Rivers and Justin Herbert for a while, who like Herbert can move, but it's not like a huge part of his game. So I think that's another piece that's very interesting to me. I think with Steichen wanting the obsessiveness, I keep coming back to that, and because like Steichen came up in the NFL thinking, or like he learned from sitting in an office with Phillip Rivers late at night discussing scheme and when a team does this, what do you do? And all that kind of stuff is what he grew up discussing. And then he went to Herbert, who played forever at Oregon, and he went to Hurts, who played at Alabama, lost his job, had to go to Oklahoma. Like those guys were, as far as coming out of college, if you talk to anybody about Herbert and Hurts, those guys were kind of already pros in the way they handled themselves. Whereas the Colts have admitted now that Anthony Richardson has not been. And so, like, you wonder, like, why did Shane Steichen bench him last year? Why did he make this decision now? Like, he's not. Richardson doesn't fit the profile of the quarterbacks he's had behind the scenes, and that leads to that leads to a mismatch in priorities and a mismatch in development.
Yeah, another thing, they've done statistical analysis of college quarterbacks, and the two things that matter when it comes to pro success is how many starts did you make? How accurate are you? Obviously, those are the two things Richardson didn't have. I am a stat guy. I'm not always going to be, that's not 100%, but that was another reason why I was not a big Richardson fan. But all right, let's move on from the quarterbacks to make Chris Ballard happy because I'm sure he's watching. We'll start with the linebackers. They picked up a linebacker, Chad Muma. I'm assuming is how he pronounces his name.
Muma.
I did some quick numbers. The Colts have far and away the fewest defensive snaps at linebacker in the AFC South, probably in the NFL, but I wasn't going to look up all of them. Just talk a little bit about what the state of the linebackers right now is. That was obviously something that's been a topic throughout preseason.
They are really betting a lot on Joe Bacci. they're betting a ton on, like, the more I think about it, they're betting an absolute enormous amount on Joe Bocci. And, you know, you say like a guy who's been mostly a special teamer in his sixth year isn't going to necessarily develop into it. Like, it's probably unlikely that he develops into a starter. Here, Ballard talks himself into that kind of stuff because Zaire Franklin was a special teamer for so long. He was a special teams captain for a couple of years, and then developed into a 170 tackle linebacker. But they need, it has to be Bocci, because that weak side linebacker role has to play well in coverage. I don't know if he can do it in the regular season. He did it in training camp. He had a lot of pass breakups at training camp. I felt like he did a good job of reading the quarterback, reading routes, but it's not the regular season. But the guy they picked up today, Chad Muma, if you go look at his Pro Football Reference page, and I think coverage stats are sometimes a little bit noisy, but his coverage stats are terrible. They're not great at all. They're worse than Franklin's. So you're not going to play those two guys together, I don't think. And that makes me wonder, like, he gives them some depth. He gives them somebody who's actually got experience. He's got 690 snaps, which is, like, I kept coming back to this during the offseason. Jalen Carlisle with 246 or 242 or something like that had the most defensive snaps of any linebacker on the roster played other than Franklin. So he gives you some snaps, but in terms of what this defense needs from that position, they're really counting a lot on Joe Bocci right now, unless they make some kind of different move at that position. He's going to have to play way above what he's ever played before as a linebacker.
Yeah, and it's Ballard has done this where he's sort of let a position slide in the offseason in terms of adding people. I mean, it's been cornerbacks, it's been offensive line, might be offensive line again this year. I guess, again, I'll look, me being Mr. Brightside in this podcast. If you're going to make a guess like that, linebacker is probably the way to go, especially with Lou Anarumo's defense, where they don't rely on linebackers a whole bunch. But it's still, and again, was there, there wasn't a great draft pick. They would have had to overdraft someone. All the guys who are coverage linebackers basically re-signed with their teams. But, again, that's sort of where they put themselves in these positions, and it's kind of disappointing that they find themselves in these spots without an answer.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the other thing is, even if Joe Bocci does take a Zaire Franklin type leap into a starting role, what if one of them gets hurt?
Yeah, there's no depth.
What if one of them gets hurt? So the other thing that was interesting that I did kind of seize on today was that Ballard said, we're going to keep looking at linebackers. So that makes me wonder, I think it's been reported that Anthony Walker is a player who's going to come in. And again, Anthony Walker does not fill your coverage role. That's a backup Mike.
Yep.
That's a backup Mike at best. But are there other players they're looking at? Is there somebody else that they're going to bring in? Are they going to continue to make movement there? This is one other thing to think about with I know Mike. I know Mike Hilton worked out today. There hasn't been a signing yet, and I kind of got the impression when I talked to some people today that maybe that wasn't necessarily a done deal the way it was initially presented in a report. I was told that Hilton wasn't the only veteran working out today and tomorrow. Like they've got a few different guys coming in. It's probably more of them updating their lists. Now they can say that and decide they like somebody in some of these positions with holes, but that was what I was told. They haven't made a signing yet. Usually if there's a workout, the signing happens right away. Could be a medical thing. The other thing was I talked to somebody in Cincinnati about Hilton. We're kind of off the linebackers now, but I kind of moved myself in here.
We're going to defensive backfield next, so we're good.
And I asked him if Hilton was a safety, and he said this is somebody who covers the Bengals all the time, and he was saying that Anarumo was rotating Hilton in the nickel even last year. So, like, yes, Mike Hilton is one of Lou Anarumo's guys. He had some really good seasons with him, but even last year, Anarumo wasn't necessarily treating him as if he was a frontline player that they had to have on the field.
Well, as I said, we got into the defensive backfield there, mostly about corners. They made a bunch of changes at corner. which is really interesting because last year they didn't really they weren't really ready at corner. They did let go of Juju Brents, which is a little bit of a surprise. But what's your assessment of what they're doing with the corners at this point?
They didn't say this. They said the injuries with Juju. Maybe I'm kind of reading between the lines here. Ballard kind of had a full throated defense of Jalen Jones today. I wonder if the old prototype for corners just doesn't fit Lou Anarumo's defense. The sort of the bigger players who maybe aren't, they don't have the same change of direction, straight line speed, that kind of thing. I wonder if that's part of this Brent's decision. The injuries, you can't argue the injuries. He only played 11 games in his 2 seasons. He's had something like 5 or 6 different things that he's had to deal with. And, the other thing is just like the guys that they brought in have been more in like the 5'10", 5'11" range, and faster, more versatile types. I wonder if that's part of this decision with Brents is he doesn't necessarily fit what Lou Anarumo wants at corner.
Yeah, because you'd also think there's no. I mean, what's the risk of keeping him in that if he gets hurt, then you just bring someone else in. You got to pay. It's not a lot. I think what was it, $2.6 million in dead cap to cut him loose. So that's not a huge deal. But yeah, it was an interesting. But to let go of a second round pick with this quickly, it was saying something. The other thing that you and I talked about, which it didn't happen, but I guess it still could they pick up? We're talking about whether there was an offensive tackle to pick up, and it's really hard to find offensive tackles. You made the point: could they pick up a guard, move Gonzalez back to being the swing tackle? I mean, whether he still starts at guard or not, he certainly could, and then just you put someone else in at guard and move him to tackle if there's an injury. Doesn't seem like that's happening, but what are your thoughts on that?
Ballard sort of had a full-throated defense of his offensive line. I'm not sold. I'm just not sold that's they played Gonzalez in the final preseason game. They didn't play any of the other offensive linemen, including Tanner Bortolini, who's also a guy who started a handful of games last year and is essentially it's his first full-time year as a starter. He wore shorts and a T-shirt at that game, whereas Gonzalez had to play 2 or 3 series. That tells me that they're a little bit worried about Gonzalez at right guard. And then some of the depth, he said Dalton Tucker's come a long way. That could be true. It is his second season. But obviously last year when they had to start him after the Will Fries injury, that eventually got to the point where they had to go out and get Mark Lewinsky. So there's a way that goes wrong. I think if they had to make a move, I think they probably make a move where if something happens to one of the tackles, I think Gonzalez probably moves out and it's Tucker instead of the rookie. Right away would be my guess, but I don't know. I'm skeptical about some of the offensive line depth. I'm skeptical that if there's a major injury like the one Will Fries had last year, if that's going to be something that they can weather.
Yeah, and it also reminds us when they put Pryor and Pinter in there, who clearly were not the right choices, and that goes back to what we were just talking about with the linebackers, where they just don't seem. I mean, it's with the salary cap, it's not like you're going to have stars everywhere, but it just doesn't seem like they're always prepared for what might or might not happen.
I thought they could have added a guard in the offseason, somebody who could compete for that starting job. Guards don't cost very much. They don't now. Like that's also why I thought we'd see a move there today at that position, because like Mark Lewinsky, who held down that right guard job pretty well for 3 or 4 years, he was a waiver claim from the Seahawks. Mid-season, not at the beginning, but he was a waiver claim from the Seahawks. Will Fries was a 7th round pick who was more of a tackle when they came out. Like that position, you can find guys elsewhere. And maybe they feel like that's Dalton Tucker. Maybe they feel like that's Matt Gonzalez, and they're going to get somebody in a spot that maybe you don't think about. But yeah, I just kept thinking, like, give yourself a few more options at that position, because some of the ones that they got, like Josh Sills is a veteran. They didn't keep him. He's on the practice squad. That's just an emergency spot. Wesley French didn't come back from his injury the same way that he was before. I think they probably should have added a guard of some kind, even if it was like a Chris Reed type play. That's a guy who they brought in for almost no money, who was really good for 1 year. I don't know why they didn't add somebody else there to give themselves a little cover in case using Matt Gonzalez there doesn't quite work the same way.
And clearly losing French and Fries within a 6-month period is terrible karma for your team. So we know that.
Well, the real question is because Fries signed with Minnesota, was Wesley French up against it? Like, did he was he always getting cut just because they'd lost the Fries?
It certainly could be that. That could certainly be true.
I guess they could have added a player named Dressing or something.
But that's a narrow window you're aiming for there.
A player named French Bread. They could have added there were options, but they never added the right teammate to continue it for him in a different way.
Ask Chris Ballard about that in the next press conference.
Right in the middle of everybody asking him all the really hard stuff, just be like, did you get rid of Wesley French because you didn't have a partner for him that made us laugh?
Yeah. We'll wrap it up with a last question from MD. Shane can't lead a team. He didn't develop Herbert or Hurts. He's a play caller who cannot communicate. We're not in the locker room. I'm not ready to go and say he's not a leader. At the same time, he hasn't communicated great with the media, I would say, at times. But what's your take on that? And, just what can we say about Shane Steichen at this point?
Well, I think there's definitely some questions still about, can he be more than an offensive coordinator? Like I said at the top of this, his strengths are looking at a defense, finding the weaknesses in that defense, and figuring out how to exploit it. There have been coaches who are not necessarily. Well, it's hard to know, like, was Bill Belichick a great communicator with his players?
No.
It doesn't seem like it from the outside, but like they were so successful, or did he just rule with such an iron fist that it worked out, And that's probably an outlier. Belichick's probably an outlier. We're going to find out this year, I think. Shane Steichen's bet is that with a quarterback who's going to run the offense the way he wants it, that they can be successful. And we're going to find out if that's true. We're going to find out if that's true, or if he's more of the guy who can just, like I said, not necessarily develop the quarterback, but maximize him by giving him the stuff that he does best.
And they're 17-17 under Steichen. That's obviously not great. At the same time, the quarterback situation's been a mess. Perhaps Steichen is part of the reason why it's a mess. But I do think, there's a chance that – I mean, again, I hate being the one who's saying this isn't all doom and gloom, because that's normally what I do. But, I mean, and again, it's a small chance. But I'm not willing to rule it out yet, but I will not be surprised if this team ends up 5-12.
Dalton James, with kind of like Norv Turner, who is Shane Steichen's mentor.
Yeah. That's not necessarily that could be a fair point. That could be a fair point. But...
we're like I said, we're going to find out. I think that there are coaches who are sort of maximizers of quarterbacks that have been successful, but they also do some of the other stuff. Like Sean Payton is not a developer of quarterbacks. He's not. That's who I covered in New Orleans. They had a guy named Garrett Grayson when I first got there that he basically ground into dust. And he was a third-round pick that he ground into dust, and he was out of the NFL quickly. He thought Taysom Hill was going to be Steve Young. He said that out loud in an interview. And Taysom never developed into anything. But if you give Peyton somebody who can handle the way he coaches, he can figure out a way to get the most out of him and put them in the best positions, like you're seeing him do with Bo Nix. Now, the flip side is, and this is the question that MD had, is Peyton does the thing where he rules by an iron hand, and it kind of ends up working for him. or at least it did a little bit with this, the other stuff. But it does say that you don't necessarily have to develop a quarterback. The problem is you have to have one. You have to get one that you can turn into something. Like Breeze was not somebody that they necessarily had to develop. They just had to give him the right offense.
All right, well, we appreciate you joining us for our first live Colts Cover 2 podcast. We plan on doing this throughout the season. We will do the more traditional podcast, First Reactions podcast after games.
Yeah, that would be hard to do live. Sometimes I'm like in an airport.
And sometimes it's at 2:00 in the morning. So, but we appreciate you joining us. This is sort of a soft launch. We'll be a little bit more prepared now that we've gone through it once. But thank you for joining us. Like and subscribe on our YouTube page, and we'll see you again next week.